Thank you all for joining us for live Q&A with Will Kent from Wiki Education. This session is a complement to the bite-sized lunchtime talk you've already watched. Welcome back, Will, and thank you also for joining us, Savannah. Once again, Will Kent is the program manager for the Wikidata and Wiki Scholars programs at Wiki Education. Savannah is the Wikimedian in residence for the Conference on College Composition and Communications Wikipedia Initiative. So we have designated a few people who are our Q&A leads today. That would be, let's see from my list, Regis, Todd, Yandu, and Richmond. So why don't we go ahead and have you all, our four Q&A specialists, feel free to raise your hand and I will happily call on you to initiate questions. The floor is yours. Let's see who our first person to raise their hand is for Q&A from our four. Thank you, Todd. Go ahead and turn on your camera.
Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Todd Hall. I am a rising second year PhD student in education policy at the University of Virginia. And after viewing the session on Wikidata, one, that's very cool. I really appreciate the ability for people to edit and contribute. And my question is, in thinking about the constantly evolving nature of the data, how should researchers think about the implications for reproducibility if they want other scholars to be able to kind of reproduce their analyses? If you have any thoughts on the versioning or ways that the data that are constantly changing can still be accessible for reproducing research?
That is an awesome question. Thanks, Todd. And Savannah, if you want to jump in, feel free to. But Wikidata is a lot like Wikipedia in that any edit that you've made to it is preserved for forever. So you can always click on the edit history of something and compare it visually to past versions of itself. And similarly, like entire versions of Wikidata exist. So you could get a version from 5 years ago or 6 years ago. So the versioning is really, really good. And that's one of the major assets, I think, of the whole linked data ecosystem that they've built. Does that kind of get at your question, Todd? I don't know if that was exactly what you were looking for.
No, that definitely gets at the question. Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay, we're looking for our next question. Let's see, Yandu, Richmond, or Regis. Who would like to jump in next with a question? Regis, go for it.
Can you see me okay? I think. Good. Okay. Hey, how you doing? Regis Saxon, fifth year PhD student at George Mason University. This is wonderful. Really enjoyed seeing this. I didn't even know it existed. Well, one of my questions is I have a few, but this is one that I was curious about Scholia, and I wondered about, I know it's linking with other data sites. Is this something that is linked with kind of the traditional sort of research journals that, we as scholars are generally interested in, like SAGE or JSTOR? Can it pull from there as well? Or is it something that's contained only within that Scholia site?
Regis, that's such a great question, and I'll try to answer it succinctly, but it's tricky. Everything you see in Scholia is just from Wikidata, and so the way that something becomes part of Scholia is that people add it to Wikidata. So there's no one like scraping JSTOR or SAGE or any other big academic database, but rather people are getting metadata from all those research papers and then adding it to Wikidata and then just presenting it on Scholia. So if it's not in Wikidata, it's not going to be on Scholia. And just because it's published somewhere doesn't mean it's automatically added to Wikidata. Some journals have a nice workflow and share metadata openly with Wikidata, but others don't. And it's just kind of luck of the draw. If somebody decides to start to add it, then it's there. And if they don't, then they don't. So it's very piecemeal and it's an imperfect process. But as you can see, there's a lot of stuff on there already, which is pretty exciting.
So I'm going to jump in with a question, and then Richmond is going to head in next. So Savannah, you had the opportunity to attend a Wikidata training that was organized by Wiki Education. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and let everyone know where you went to school and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I generously was funded by Nanette's Lab, the Interdisciplinary Research Group on Privacy, to attend the Wikidata course with Will a couple months back. And the entire experience was really great. I really loved it because of the fact that it was more about accessing more emergent questions versus like a very strict structure. So Will kind of took us through like, what are some examples that could relate to our work hands-on. Like for me specifically, I was really interested in, I work with Wiki projects a lot. And so I was really interested in how we can find content gaps on Wikipedia through Wikidata and present them in a really accessible way to the public, because I feel like a lot of the issues with Wiki projects are accessibility to an outside audience. And so it was really great to see some examples of different ways things can be displayed really nicely on Wiki projects. Yeah.
Richmond, you're next. Please unmute yourself, Richmond, so we can hear your brilliant voice.
All right, can you hear me now? All right, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Richmond Danso. I graduated from Howard University last year, PhD International Relations and American Government. So my question is, how are you trying to give opportunities to upcoming scholars, right, so that we can contribute to building a more robust community within that field?
That's a great question too. So the great thing about Wikidata is that anyone can participate. There's no like course you have to take. There's no qualifications you need. Anyone can start. But that said, it's very complicated and there's a lot to it. But just like Wikipedia, anyone can start editing it. And more importantly, anyone can start using the data. So you can download like little sections of it, or you can download the whole thing. And if you want to run programs through it, you can do that. Or if you just want to run queries to answer questions, you can do that too. And you can also lead events to get other people to participate. So edit-a-thons are a really common way to train other people to start to contribute. Very common in the Wikipedia space, but also becoming more common on Wikidata. And then also sharing data visualizations is a really nice way to kind of amplify the message that you want to share and share the data that you're most interested in. So there are many points of entry and a lot of different ways to get involved. And there's no barrier to joining. Savannah, is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, so that's something I kind of deal with my job, is trying to get scholars to edit more frequently. And I would say like the intersection with Wikidata is there are so many ways to kind of just show scholars that all of these really interesting topics within their fields of interest are really poorly developed. And it could also just be starting out with a couple citations that you add to Wikipedia, or adding a Wikidata item, filling it out a little bit more so you can kind of show more people what needs to be done. I think the biggest barrier, if there is one, is just the amount of workload already on scholars is pretty intense. And also getting to do free labor is really hard. But if you make it more of a collaborative process, and I think Wikidata is really the key to that, is like showing people that you can take little steps and do little things to sort of fix these pages. That's a way to sort of organize people as well.
So our next question is from, I believe, is it Yandu who's next? And then Richmond again.
Hi, I'm Yandu. I'm a sixth-year PhD student from McGill, and thank you again for being here. I feel like I had a question and then people started saying things that were related, so I don't know how clear of a question this is going to be. So this is my first time hearing about Wikidata, and I think it's really cool and like a cool resource to be there. And I feel like it can help kind of bridge the gap between academics and the public in terms of like general public uses Wikipedia or any other sort of general source to learn about information, whereas we use articles. So, or other different sources, I guess, compared to the public. So I guess my question is, if you see some sort of bridge between Wikidata in having more like open access articles or even like open access data, and I guess that culture that kind of seems to be budding within like an academic community. Yeah, I don't know if that's a clear question, but yes.
I think I'm picking up a couple of interesting threads from what you were saying. And if I go too far, feel free to pull me back in. But yeah, Wikidata is cool because it is very much like a reorganization of resources that already exist. So there are links to PDFs and publications, but there's also just more data about those publications. So it'll have a big impact in making these things easier to find for people, which is kind of like the #1 barrier to a lot of research is, does the research exist already that would help my research? Or like, how can I get this data set, or how can I interact with these individuals? And Wikidata is really, really well positioned to show those relationships. Additionally, it's a great portal into all these other linked data repositories. And I don't know if I can share my screen, but I've got a cool visual that you might enjoy seeing. Oh, it's working. Great. So this is a link to the, or this page is the linked open data cloud. And if we look at all of these things, you can see that these are all different linked data repositories. And here's Wikidata, which is connected to all of these other linked data repositories. And that's just a fancy way of saying all these other databases that can get along well with each other because the data is formatted in a similar way. So it's also a really big effort to de-silo subject area specific data, which is nice. So it will reach out across multiple disciplines the longer it's around. And I think that's a really compelling facet to Wikidata.
I think really quickly, Nanette wanted me to show you just a little walkthrough of how you can edit Wikipedia really quickly. So I'll just take a little sidetrack here from what Will's saying for a second. Show you that. So this is a wiki project. These are great spaces to sort of find articles that you might be interested in editing. It's just like a group of Wikipedia editors that collaborate around a specific area. So this one's on writing, rhetoric, those types of things. And you can usually find articles if you don't have one in mind that are in need of edits. So like the one for African American Vernacular English. Obviously you need an account, but pretty easy to make. And I guess I'll just show you really quickly how to add a citation, but you can just click on edit. If you have a citation in mind, if you see something that isn't cited, or sometimes there'll be like a little citation needed tag at the end of sentences. That's a really great way to add something. So I just sort of put my cursor where I want to add it. Go to cite. You can reuse citations as well right here. You can add it manually. So you have a website, book, journal, news, or just like a basic template that you can paste a citation in if there's a style you want to use. Or you can just add in the URL, something like that, and it'll generate it for you. So it's really easy. Usually they will show up at the bottom here in the references section. So you can kind of see what the different sources are there. I'm sure a lot of you have used the sources section for different Wikipedia articles before, but yeah, so really simple. If you're ever just interested in something, or you see something in your topic area that isn't filled in, that's a really simple way to do that.
Thank you, Savannah. This was to the question about ways to engage and think about Wikipedia as open source. So if you have an expertise, find a page, click edit, and make a change. You can change a few words, change a comma, add a citation. Make sure if you happen to have a page that your page is correct. Yeah, lots of great things that you can do. So we're going to, the next question is Todd Hall. Go ahead and jump in, Todd.
Hello there again. So I will admit that I am not a power user of Wikipedia, but maybe I will be. I'm learning so much about it now. I was, as a high school student, kind of disabused from Wikipedia, actually, before coming into knowledge about kind of open source and open science. I had high school teachers who would say, like, don't use Wikipedia, anyone can edit it. And now the idea that anyone can edit it is such a powerful idea. And I'm increasingly understood that. But that's just a segue to set up my question, which is, do you find yourself as Wiki education ever confronting that sort of stigma? And in particular, is there efforts or outreach to address that in specific when it comes to pipelines of whether it's K-12 students or kind of emerging scholars to help them kind of reframe and combat that narrative?
That's a really good question, Todd. All the time is the answer. In every single class I teach, there's always like 3 or 4 people who say, oh, Wikipedia, it's an unreliable source, or we were taught never to use it, or I have colleagues who really disparage it. So all the time. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. And people aren't wrong to question it, but people are wrong to like talk down about it. Like, you can question it, but the good thing about Wikipedia is it's so transparent. You can see if something is of bad quality or good quality. It's not like it's hiding anything. And there's no algorithm to promote one article over another. What you type in is what you get. So it's really up to the reader to be able to analyze an article and understand its quality. And there are a lot of ways to do that. I mean, it's not fair to like put the entire emphasis or the onus of it on the reader, but it's freeing to know as the reader that you can evaluate things yourself because there's nothing hidden, which I think is pretty refreshing. So yeah, we combat this, or we engage with it in a lot of the Wikipedia classes I teach and Wikidata classes too. And one statistic that we can point to is that there are more like evaluation metrics, techniques, and methodologies that exist around creating information on Wikipedia than ever before. Like, there's a whole machine learning platform that analyzes articles mostly by like bytes and characters and images and number of references. So it's not actually like understanding the words in the article, but just kind of providing a quick analysis to let readers know how good an article is or where there could be some improvement. So we talk a lot about those new actions within the community. Savannah, I don't know if you have anything that you'd add to that too.
Yeah, I think there's always, I think the biggest part about it is the stigma of the fact just that Wikipedia will always be unreliable. I think there is a good deal of scholars, though, who are starting to, I feel like there's a shift going on. Even just seeing everyone here today makes me hopeful that there's a shift going on. I think the biggest issue is just knowing how Wikipedia works, and even just hearing from people today saying there's so much power in everyone being able to edit just shows that you do have the power to change these pages, and you are the people most qualified to do so. And so when you think of it as public scholarship, it becomes a lot more accessible to academia, I think, versus like some outside digital platform that's disrupting academia. It can work in kind of harmony.
And if I can just add to that, because you reminded me of a really good point. I was working with some chemistry professors, and we were improving chemistry articles. And one professor spent a lot of time adding new safety protocols to an article and checked the page views. I don't know if you know this, but Wikidata has like a very robust analytics side, so you can see how many people read a page per day. And he saw after he added his new sections to the article that he had like 25,000 readers in just a handful of days, which are many more readers than he ever had with any of his academic publications. And he was like, this is my most read piece so far in my career, which was a really cool experience for him.
So our next question is going to be from Regis, but before Regis jumps in, I want to mention two things for the sociologists out there in the room. That one of my favorite scholars, Denise Anthony, who was one of the co-authors on Towards the Sociology of Privacy, also has a spectacular paper on Wikipedia, which Savannah and I have read recently together. And she'll share the name of that. She's looking it up right now for us, which is fantastic. And we'll share that in just a minute. I also want to call everyone's attention to a great talk by Eric Olin Wright, a scholar in our field that we lost recently, sadly, who did a talk at ASA about Wikipedia as a new frontier to combat false information and also for connections between scholars. So Savannah is again kind enough to look that up right now. She just dropped that in the chat box. Let me. So the Denise Anthony piece. It's Denise Anthony, Sean Smith, Tim Williamson, 2009, Reputation and Reliability in Collective Goods: The Case of the Online Encyclopedia, Wikipedia. Rationality and Society is the location of that, and then we'll make sure we get you the name of the Eric Olin Wright piece also. But it's an exciting and interesting frontier and space for discussion. So Regis, you want to jump in and ask your question? Todd is next after that.
Sure. Yeah, I had one question, and then everything about Eric Olin Wright kind of took me in a different direction. So as my follow-up question, I think to keep us in the vein of what we're talking about is how, what steps do you take, or how does that work in terms of making sure that false information isn't on these pages and isn't kind of populating everywhere, especially as we're facing this problem everywhere nowadays. So I was just curious of how that worked in terms of how you kind of moderate and regulate that.
Very timely question. Oh, Savannah, did I cut you off? I'm sorry. Oh, so again, this kind of circles back to Wikipedia's transparency. You can see every conversation that community members have about what constitutes a reliable source. So if you're questioning the publisher of a certain source, the community has a page for that, and I can share that with you. Let me just pull it up and share my screen. So here's the link for everyone to have and to hold and to read whenever you want. But there's this whole page all about what reliable sources are and why they're deemed reliable and what they're not. So this is kind of like the main way to prevent misinformation from ending up on Wikipedia, because it usually comes from the same kinds of sources. And you can go to the talk page, which is like the editorial page. So it's where the community has conversation around certain areas. And you can see there's only 64 pages of archives about what constitutes a reliable source. So all of these different conversations around sources and how they're being used on Wikipedia. So you can read all of this, and what's more is you can participate in it. So if you disagree with it, or if you think it's great and you want to expand it in whatever direction, you can just jump in and start having those conversations with people. But like within any broad system, it takes a lot of time for change to be realized. So it does take time, but that said, it's, I think, refreshing how open all of this is, and you can just see when Wikipedia decided that Fox News wasn't a reliable source, and you can see the conversations and the rationale behind that. So that's kind of nice.
Alongside that, I would just encourage everyone to look up just like big figures and look at their talk pages and just see like the evolution of their career and conversations about different sources. I know there was a lot of controversy behind Kamala Harris's page during the election, and so that's a really interesting conversation to look at on the talk page and see how sort of disagreements were resolved. Yeah.
Todd, you're up next.
Well, I felt like there was a teaser in Nanette's comments about the proliferation of false information, and then we just followed up. And I had a question on that. I'll modify it slightly and pick up on something that you mentioned, Will. So using the Fox News case as a source that was no longer deemed reliable, I was curious whether you were, or how Wiki Education is thinking about echo chambers potentially emerging in users of Wikipedia, and how you could seek to mitigate that potentially, or how if in any ways you're thinking about addressing that as an organization, or if that's hasn't been an issue for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's a really good question too, Todd. All of these are really wonderful questions. So as far as the echo chamber goes, what Wiki Education does is we target content gaps on Wikipedia. So we're extremely biased in what we do. We want to add information to places where there wasn't information before, or expand articles that didn't have a lot of sourcing to it. So as far as that goes, we're very biased and have a mission to add things. Beyond that, whatever people decide to add is up to them, and whether it sticks around on Wikipedia is up to the Wikipedia community. So we're just creating a space for people to understand how the community works and how to add information to it. And so that's very much how Wikipedia works. We're just kind of like creating space to bring in new people. That's all we do, with a little bit of extra scaffolding around coursework and some trainings. But really, it's up to Wikipedia and other Wikipedians to read articles and deem them like good quality or poor quality, or kind of work through the tone so it's less promotional and more encyclopedic and neutral in its presentation. But Wikipedia doesn't shy away from the fact that it's very imperfect and that there's a lot of systemic bias within Wikipedia. And that's a huge problem that's rampant across the whole project. And so I think, again, because of its transparency, it's really easy to pick on Wikipedia because it has all these problems and they're very easily identifiable. But it's also easy to act on the problems because Wikipedia is so open, and any of us in this room right now could start editing it. So I think that's a constant source of tension, and we're there just to bring in more people. So I don't know if that answers your echo chamber question exactly, but that's kind of where my thoughts are.
I would also encourage folks to take a look at the research of Chris Bale, who's doing quite a bit right now, one of our co-founders, on misinformation. So I will just add in, and thank you, Savannah, before turning it over to Ebony to ask a question. Savannah added a link to the video of Eric Olin Wright's talk about Wikipedia, and I also added a call to duty, ASA and the Wikipedia Initiative, also by Eric Olin Wright from November 2011. Ebony, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you, Nanette. Hi, my name is Ebony Russ. I'm a recent graduate of Howard University Department of Sociology and Criminology, PhD program, and now a research fellow at Harvard University. Thank you so much, both Will and Savannah, for sharing the information regarding Wikidata, and then also the reliability of resources or a source. Could you speak to just quickly what would be hallmarks of a data set that lacks credibility? If I'm just a new researcher, I'm going through and I see something, how would I quickly know? Because I intend on reading the article, but how would I know right off the bat that this is not reliable?
Great question. So a lot of the data that winds up on Wikidata comes from institutions that are trusted, which is a really great way to kind of start to understand whether a data set is reliable or not. So I work with a lot of data from like national libraries, like the National Archives, a lot of universities, a lot of museums. And so all of that data is, kind of approved by the organization that you're getting it from. So that's a really easy way to tell if it's good data. Also, the methodology behind the data collection is usually a pretty good giveaway. And also whether it comes from like one person or a group. Anytime it comes from a group, it's a little more likely to be better than just one person saying, hey, here's a data set, I don't know where it came from. And it's since Wikidata works like Wikipedia, you have to reference everything that you add to it. So it's really easy to see where people got their data from. And then you can start to kind of evaluate that source on your own. But I think those are a couple of characteristics I focus on.
So I have another question for you, Will, and I know you included some of this in your video when you presented to us recently. Can you show us or tell us some examples of really cool things people are doing with Wikidata?
Yeah, I would love to. There's a lot that people are doing with Wikidata right now. Let's see if I can pull some up really fast.
And while he is doing that, Savannah and Will, we'd love your email addresses too in the chat box in case folks have questions, want to follow up. I know almost everyone here is looking for research collaborators, so you may get some excited emails. And just so you all know, I'm exceptionally proud of Savannah. She's a recent grad, very recent undergraduate graduate from Berkeley, who was an RA in my lab, and I am just so incredibly proud of her. So just had to throw that out there.
All right, so I've got a few examples pulled up. One is kind of silly and one is kind of serious. Figured I'd give a little variety. And let me just add my email too before I forget. Thanks, Nanette. Okay, so here's the first one. It's about witches. Who doesn't love a witch? So this is from one of my friends, Ewan, who lives in Scotland, and at his university, they had a large database of witchcraft data from like the 15 and 1600s when they were killing witches, which was horrible. And so what he did is he and some of his students added a lot of this witch data to Wikidata. And this is just the page that walks through all of their processes, but it ends up being a series of maps and charts and graphs all about where the witches lived. And so you can see this is Wikidata, the query service that's being pulled up, and this is a map of Scotland, and you can click on these little tiny dots to see who was accused and where they lived. And so prior to this, all of this data was just a boring spreadsheet, and you couldn't really pin it to a map or anything cool like that. But since his students moved it live, now you can look at those results, which is where they lived. You can see where the trials took place, the residences of other people associated with the trials, the bubble chart of gender, so were any male identifying people accused of being witches? And yes, there were. And we can click on this to, oops, not that one, but we can click on let's see, where does that live? We can click on the query and run it again and see how many men were accused, which there was a lot. There were 500 men almost, which is something I didn't know until just now. So this is one really cool project that's taking place. And this is just one set of data. You could imagine many other sets of data applied to a map, applied to a table, appearing and getting some really cool results from it. So that's my silly example. My serious example is there's something called the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, which is basically how the Library of Congress kind of classifies everything in its system. So anything that exists pretty much goes through the PCC. And the PCC recently started a Wikidata pilot, which has 38 libraries participating in it with over 250 people. And so these are all kind of like your leading experts in classification in the library and information sciences across the United States. And they're using Wikidata to kind of challenge the way that they understand how to classify and catalog things right now. And this is an ongoing pilot taking place at this very moment that could have like wide-reaching implications across the field and across entire collections in libraries worldwide, because a lot of libraries use the Library of Congress system, whether or not they're in the United States or not. So this could have really big implications, and I think it's just a really cool example. And I can also share this with you and explain the dashboard a little bit more in case you have questions about it.
So we have another question. There we go. Thank you, Regis.
Yeah, my question just was around, because I saw the query service reminded me of, I'm going to look up how to code in Sparkle, but if there are any sort of resources on how to do that, that'd be great. But the other question is, you mentioned in your video that there's a possibility of running very complex queries. in there, and that we want to kind of grow in that complexity. Do you have any examples of kind of the kind of queries, kind of complex queries we can run, just to kind of understand the parameters of, the questions that we can ask? That would be interesting.
I know that's a particularly interesting question today too, because they're doing trace data. So all of our teams today are coming up with research questions, finding digital trace data and doing visualization. So I think people are going to be listening very carefully here. So go for it, Will.
Yeah, great question. So I think that Scalia kind of touches on some of those complexities where you can just, all of those queries are live. So as a refresher, you can just click on like a university and see their research output and like who's publishing what and what awards they've won and what's the gender breakdown, because you can add gender tags to individuals in Wikidata. And so that's like information that never existed publicly before from institutions that Wikidata just like kind of made public. Based on like the data sets. But you can, it's basically any little piece of data that exists within Wikipedia, you can render through the query service on Wikidata. Some of the more compelling queries that I like are anything about like current politicians. Wikidata is pretty good at. So if you want a list of like all the current mayors of large cities who are female, that's a query that you can just run in Wikidata and you get an up-to-date answer. But there's a lot of other really cool queries with genetics and proteins, and I don't know nearly enough about those to share with any confidence. But there are whole pages on Wikidata of just queries that exist, and some are about entire collections within libraries or museums. Others are about like IDs of researchers and taxonomies. So there are just too many good ones to share with you right now. I'm kind of overwhelmed. Let's see. I think. No, that one's not very interesting. I'm sorry. I would have to get back to you on this one, Regis, just because it's a big. There are too many. You can query anything you want. Yeah, too great data. Thanks, Nanette. But I can share this page with you if you want to do some exploration yourself. Because there are probably 1,000 queries listed on this page. You can see why I got overwhelmed.
Yandu is up next.
Hi. Okay, so related to the fact that anyone can contribute to Wikidata, do you have an idea of how many or like what proportion of account users have a scholarly background or are experts in the field? Not necessarily that, I mean, it could be interesting to analyze that data, but just for your own knowledge, like, do you have an idea of what that looks like? And then somewhat related, somewhat not related, just broadly, what subject areas do you know have gaps that like need filling?
I don't know how many Wikidata participants have an academic background. I know they just released the very first Wikidata community survey this morning. So that's a really great question that you just asked. And I can actually share that with you if I can find it really fast. And this just has some really basic demographic data. So you can follow that link to see it. And there are some people listed as in education. So I assume that they're researchers, but it doesn't get more specific than that. As far as content gaps go, break down any classical power dynamics. So if it's about not a man and not a white person, there are definitely content gaps on Wikidata, not a straight person, content gaps on Wikidata. Also a lot of local knowledge. So anything about neighborhoods, anything about communities are really missing. So whether that's like geographic data or business data or school data, all of that is really underpopulated in Wikidata as well. And there are large gaps of historical data that are missing. There's a huge emphasis on the global north, perhaps unsurprisingly. And there's, I think, probably the one place where there is a lot of data are academic and scholarly articles. I think 31% of all Wikidata is comprised of scholarly articles at this point. So if you're adding anything outside of that, you're in great shape and you're helping out.
Seeing no additional hands, I'm going to pause and give it just a second to see if a hand appears. I'm hoping you both will offer some final thoughts on either what excites you about your current work or the possibilities of Wikipedia or Wikidata. And then we will give people back a little bit of time before their next activity.
Oh, well, I'll just say that last question really, it's so interesting seeing what questions emerge from these types of settings, because I think it's just the way you keep learning about different ways to make this more accessible. That last question really is something that's like, wow, we should really know that. It seems so simple, but at the same time, so difficult. So it's really interesting to hear you all talk, and yeah, I just learned so much from this as well, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here as well.
Echoing Savannah, I just want to say thank you so much for letting me speak and for letting me fill your ears during your lunch. I'm sorry for bothering you, but I do really appreciate the opportunity and all of the really amazing questions that you've asked. I think I'd leave you with this thought, which is because both Wikipedia and Wikidata are open, and because anyone can participate, I would encourage all of you to participate in ways that make sense for you, whether that's becoming a full-time editor or just going in there and clicking the edit button and making little tiny updates. Every little bit helps. And I mean this in two ways. One, for representation on Wikipedia and Wikidata itself. So like what do the articles represent and what does the data represent? But also for you as individuals. Just because your own activity in the community will change the way the community works and help representation within the editor community, which is arguably more important in the long run. I guess they're both important. I take that back. They're both really important, but it all comes down to you participating. And so keep an eye out for classes. I do teach classes. They do cost money, but we offer financial aid, so you should definitely just check that box. And I would love to work with any of you moving forward, and also just answer or ask questions and I'll answer them. I love growing the community and meeting new people. So thanks again for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you both so much for joining us. As someone who has spent a lot of time in the Wikipedia space, mentoring students and working to diversify the types of people that are clicking that edit button, I'm so excited that you all are here with us. So excited that you were willing to present today. I'd encourage people especially to think about what Savannah mentioned about citations. One of the things that is vastly underrepresented on Wikipedia is academic peer-reviewed citations. So a very simple way that you can quickly improve a page is to add a little bit on research that you're already doing. So thank you both so much for being with us. Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.